So you just landed your first real job and you're wanting to know what to do with some of the money that you're making. That's really the nature of today's topic. But before I jump into that, be sure to like us on our YouTube channel and follow us. Subscribe and like, as they say, and be sure to consider signing up for our newsletter and following us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and other social media platforms that we have available. We'd love to have you continue to listen to some of the good financial nuggets that we're passing along to you. So the topic I want to talk about is you just found yourself, starting your first job, and you're making a little bit of money, and maybe you're fresh out of college or school or medical school, or you've become a resident. You could find yourself at various different places in life, but we're starting to see some money come in. What are the first few things that you should be thinking about what to do with that money? And I have a few pointers. So the first thing that I would recommend that you do is to get serious about budgeting. Now, I know budgeting is not a particularly provocative or sexy term or idea, and especially unless maybe you're a numbers person or you even have a bit of a flair of accountant in you, it just may not be your thing. It's not what you want to do. But I got to tell you, budgeting is just one of the very best things you can do in your finances, period. And this is definitely now the time to start getting in the habit of budgeting. I have like a weekly cadence in my life where every Saturday morning before everyone wakes up in the family, I take about 30 minutes, drink my cup of coffee Saturday morning. I'm wearing my comfy pajamas and I work through our budget. Specifically, we use YNAB. You need a budget. Highly recommend that service provider. Again, YNAB, you need a budget. Fantastic. Been using it for over a decade. And every Saturday morning, I like clockwork, you can pretty much guarantee it. I'm going to spend the first 30 minutes of my morning just working through our numbers. How much money did we bring in this last week? What kind of expenses do we have? And where are we situated as we're looking ahead month to month? And then I use that feedback and I meet with my wife briefly, as she's slowly getting out of bed. And we have just a 5-minute conversation about where are things at. And I let her know if we're getting a little tight on a certain types of our accounts. And I pass that information along, and then she uses it into the next week and is aware of what she can and cannot spend. And myself too, I'm aware of what I can and cannot spend. And so we have just this great cadence, this great communication that's taking place. Almost rarely in fact, actually, I don't know if we've ever had a money fight. It would be very infrequent in our household because we just aren't surprised. I'm budgeting. We pay attention to these sort of things and we're just not caught off guard. Not to say that life doesn't give us our ups and downs, but we're just not caught off guard. So I couldn't recommend this really enough. I'll create a whole video separately as to why I love budgeting so much. But if in the early stages of your career, get in the habit of using and being on a budget, it will do so much good for you. Along those lines, besides budgeting as a first financial step to take, I would recommend building up an emergency fund. Now, when you start to have a little bit of money, you have interest maybe in buying some nicer and funner things. Maybe it's a new car, new house, upgrading some of the stuff you have in your home, like furniture, perhaps going on a vacation. There's any number of things that we find attractive and we want to spend our money on. But what we need to get set away, maybe beyond that, we want to start investing. Like we're like, oh, let's go make some more money with our money. And hey, that's a good idea. Like that's what I'm all about too. Let's go make some more money with your money. But let's first have a solid foundation in place. And that really requires that we have just some money set aside in savings. Now, the rule of thumb here is somewhere between 3 to 6 months, maybe as much as 12 months, depending on your personality and risk profile and preferences. I wouldn't probably go much beyond 12 months for people. I think anywhere beyond that, we're starting to just put too much money aside in savings and probably not getting much for that money. But somewhere between 3 to 6 months of living expenses, as we call it. And what do we mean by living expenses? That means you could go without earning any income, 3 months without collecting a paycheck, and you could manage. You could get by and cover all your core needs. Now, naturally enough, if you were in that situation, you're probably going to pull a little tighter, contract your spending, and be minding your P's and Q's, as they say. So your living expenses, just this core, your monthly rent, your whatever your monthly obligations might be that you really couldn't do without, whether that's maybe debt obligations, loan payments, car payments, grocery, food costs, obviously. Could be cell phone, various things that you just couldn't cut, perhaps an internet bills, things of that nature. So what are those expenses but even if you wanted to cut them, you probably couldn't because you got to live, right? And could you go 3 months? And so, generally speaking, in my experience, we're talking $15,000 to $25,000 is where that number is at least initially situated. So save up if you need a dollar amount. Work to save $15,000 to $25,000. And then there's, put that in a high yield savings account, maybe partially, mildly invest the money just to get a little bit of return on it. Could go into details separately in another call what I mean by mildly investing. But for the most part, that money should just be there in cash available for yourself. And it's there. It has so much value because it just takes some stress off, some weight off. Like you've got some breathing room and you're not living, by definition, you're not living paycheck to paycheck any longer if you have that. And that's a great place to be at. A lot of people, a lot of Americans, unfortunately, are living paycheck to paycheck. Don't be one of them. Save some money, put some money aside, $15,000, $25,000 for starters, and get out of that rat race cycle, as we call it. And then, a few other things that you can consider in the early stages of your career, especially if you're expecting your income to be a lot higher than what it is now. And so we're just starting out, would be to probably be looking to save some money away. Now, how aggressive you want to be with saving that money is really dependent on your long-term aspirations, the possibilities of how long your shelf life, how long will your skill set last and work, and how demanding is this job, and how many years do I expect to be working, and that can vary depending on various professions, different types of specialty, where it may be relatively short, 15 to 20, could be as little as 15 to 20 years. But for other lines of work could be 30 to 35 years. Really just, it has some variability. So how much you have to save, it's kind of contingent on that, because if you obviously only work for 15 years, you got to make up for a lifetime's worth of savings in 15 years. Whereas if you're working for 30 or 40 years, well, you've got 30 to 40 years to make up for a lifetime's worth of savings. But, if you are eager to be getting some money tucked away, and maybe you're what we might call a super saver, you could be looking at maxing out, your 401k accounts or 403b accounts available to you through your employer as a starter. For the most part, that's about a $23,000 contribution. And if you're in the lowest income years of your career, it would make a lot of sense, as a kind of a default general advice. Don't know your situation, but probably be doing that as a Roth contribution, since these are probably the most favorable tax rates you'll see in your whole lifetime. And let's go ahead and say yes to getting that money taxed today, because we're probably not going to get a better deal on it throughout your lifetime, or even the lifetime of maybe those who would receive that through an inheritance. Now, there's various planning possibilities here, so we don't want to get carried away, but going all in on a Roth contribution for your 401k, or going and contributing to a IRA, an individual retirement account. These are two different types of retirement accounts, but they do have some small nuances to them. You could do a 401k. You could also contribute to an IRA/Roth IRA. Would prefer that Roth variation. Whether or not you can contribute to that Roth IRA fully would depend on just how much income you have, whether or not you're married, whether or not you're filing separately on your tax return. There's a number of variables that would be potentially a limiting factor. But yes, I mean, if we have to come up with just a general number, I would say minimally do at least 10 to 15% of your income is getting saved away. But if you're more aggressive and you really want to get that nest egg built up, and perhaps it gives you some anxiety not having any money saved, we could be doing as much as 25%. Of course, we got to keep an eye out towards debt obligations. What are you doing for your student loans? If you have any credit cards, by all means, let's get those paid off in full. We don't want to have a recurring balance on a credit card that's not getting paid off in full, and now we're getting charged with those high interest rates before we invest. Like, paying off that credit card is definitely going to be some of the best use of your money. But just thinking of a few initial steps. Let's get budgeting underway. Let's get that emergency fund underway. Let's get some money saved and get compounding working for your in your benefit. And then let's take a look at maybe some of those debt obligations too, and make sure we're happy with where those are going in terms of their trajectory. You do all those things, and that's at least a good first start to be at. In terms of your investment options, there's a whole number of considerations for you. It depends on what's available in your 401k and with your employer. But in the early stages of a career, and before we don't have much of really any money set aside, I got to be honest with you, I think a target date retirement fund, one's set to when you would retire. So maybe something like a 2060, 2065, especially if we have like a Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab variation of a target date retirement fund. Well, any one of those are probably going to be just fine, at least as we start off early on. pretty solid solution. May not be the perfect solution over the long term, but it's a pretty solid solution in the early stages. No need to complicate it. Keep those investment fees low and allow the market and time to do their work. So I hope you found this to be helpful. Again, please follow us and like us on the YouTube channel, and then consider signing up for our newsletter and following us on our social media platforms. And if you're interested in some financial planning services or would like to have a consultation, we're fee-only advisors, and we're here really to service our listeners. So reach out, and we'll set up a call and see what we can do to be of help to you. Thanks so much.